The sun hung mercilessly over the Arizona plains, a white-hot disk that baked everything beneath it. For months, not a single cloud had crossed the sky. The rivers had shrunk into thin, muddy trails, and even the seasoned cowhands in the region whispered that they had never seen the land so thirsty. At the edge of this vast, cracked wilderness stood Samuel Briggs' ranch, a few leaning fences, a weather-beaten barn, and a small wooden house that looked older than the man himself. Samuel wasn't always poor. He had inherited a decent stretch of grazing land from his father, along with a handful of cattle. But drought after drought had stripped him of almost everything. Now he had only 6 cows left, a stubborn mule named Daisy, and a single well that still held water, though he checked it every morning with prayer and trembling hands. That afternoon, the heat shimmered across the plains like dancing ghosts. Samuel stood near the old well, rope in one hand, listening to the bucket scrape against the stone walls as it descended. When he hauled it back up, relief washed over him. There was still water, although the level was lower than yesterday. He sighed, wiped his forehead, and turned to give Daisy a drink when he heard something faint, a rhythmic thudding, far off, carried by the dry wind. Hoofbeats. Samuel narrowed his eyes, scanning the horizon. Slowly, shapes emerged from the heat haze, 3 riders, moving fast. Even from a distance, he recognized the dark coats, the wide-brim hats, the way they rode like men who trusted no one. The Dalton gang. Samuel's stomach knotted. Months ago, these same outlaws had intercepted his supply wagon and stolen nearly everything: flour, tools, medicine, all the things he had saved money for. He had no weapons to fight them today, and even if he did, they outnumbered him. Running wasn't an option. Hiding was useless. He stood still, shoulders tense, watching them approach. Within minutes, the riders stopped several yards from him. Their horses looked half dead, ribs visible, nostrils flaring as they panted. Dust covered the men's clothes, faces, and boots. The leader, Wyatt Dalton, pulled off his hat and wiped his brow. His eyes, gray and sharp, met Samuel's. "We ain't here for trouble," Wyatt said, though his tone carried the weight of a warning. "We're out of water. Haven't found a creek in 2 days." Samuel glanced at the well. His well. His lifeline. He thought of the supplies they had stolen. Of the nights he had gone hungry. Of the fear he had felt seeing their wanted posters nailed to every saloon door. He had every reason to turn away, every reason to spit in the dust and say no. But then he looked at their horses, creatures that had done no wrong, and at the men who, despite their reputation, looked more desperate than dangerous at that moment. Without a word, Samuel walked to the well, filled a tin cup, and held it out. Wyatt stared at him, stunned. "You'd give water to us? After what we did?" Samuel shrugged slightly. "Thirst makes no enemies," he said quietly. "Just people in need." The gang exchanged uncertain glances. Then, slowly, Wyatt reached for the cup. And in that blistering moment, a simple act of mercy planted the first seed of a story that would grow far beyond Samuel's dusty ranch, into something that would one day be called history. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint slosh of water as Wyatt Dalton held the tin cup in his dusty hand. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. Outlaws weren't used to kindness, especially not from people they had wronged. The West was a place where grudges lasted longer than friendships, and mercy was often seen as weakness. But Samuel Briggs didn't look weak. He looked tired, yes, his clothes patched, his boots worn to thin leather, his face lined by sun and struggle, but his eyes were steady. Calm. He didn't flinch even when 3 notorious gunmen stood a few feet away. Wyatt finally raised the cup to his lips. The water was warm, tasting faintly of minerals in the inside of the old well, but to him it felt like ice on a blazing day. He drank slowly, almost reverently, before passing the cup back to Samuel. "Obliged," Wyatt muttered. The other 2, Hank Meeker and Billy Cole, followed, drinking deeply while keeping their hands close to their holsters. Old habits died hard. Once they finished, Samuel dipped the bucket again, pouring more water into a wooden trough for the horses. The animals pushed forward eagerly, their tongues lapping noisily. "You're a strange man, Briggs," Hank grunted, still eyeing him suspiciously. "Most folks would have shot at us, or at least slammed a door." Samuel chuckled dryly. "Don't own a gun, and I don't have doors strong enough to slam." Wyatt studied him for a few seconds. "You remember us, don't you? From the wagon?" "I do," Samuel replied simply. "And you still offered water." Samuel leaned against the well's stone edge. A man's mistakes don't matter much when he's dying of thirst. Billy lowered his gaze. That single sentence carried a weight the gang couldn't ignore. They were outlaws, yes, robbers, fugitives, occasionally violent, but not heartless. And here was a man who, instead of hoping for revenge, chose kindness without expectation. Wyatt stepped closer, but not threateningly. Why live out here alone? Land like this doesn't give much back. Samuel glanced toward his small house. It was my father's place. Hard to leave the ground that raised you. Even harder to survive on it, Wyatt murmured. Samuel smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how much a person can survive when they don't have another choice. A silence settled over them, not tense, but reflective. The heat softened as the sun dipped lower, casting long orange shadows. A hawk circled overhead, letting out a solitary cry. For just a moment, the lines between outlaw and rancher blurred. They were simply men on a dry, unforgiving land, each fighting their own battles. Wyatt finally tugged the reins of his horse. We're not staying long, but your kindness won't be forgotten. I didn't do it to be remembered, Samuel replied. That's exactly why it will be, Wyatt said quietly. The gang mounted their horses, nodding once before turning toward the open plains. As they rode away, the wind carried fragments of their conversation, low, thoughtful, nothing like the sharp tones of men planning their next crime. Samuel watched until they vanished into the shimmering distance. To him, it felt like a small, strange moment in a life filled with hard days. He didn't know that the decision he made by the well would echo far louder and farther than the hoofbeats fading across the horizon. He only knew one thing: something had changed. Not just around him, but within the Dalton gang itself. 2 weeks passed, each day hotter than the last. Samuel Briggs woke before sunrise every morning, checking the well, feeding his small herd, repairing fence posts that had dried and cracked under the ruthless sun. Life on the ranch had always been a slow grind, but recently it felt heavier, almost as if the land itself was warning him of something coming. He didn't have to wait long. One afternoon, as Samuel was mending a broken section of fence, dust stirred on the horizon. This time, it wasn't 3 tired riders, it was 6 men, riding tall, wearing clean suits and polished boots that didn't belong in rural Arizona. At their head was Amos Covington, a wealthy land baron whose name everyone knew, mostly out of fear. Samuel wiped his hands on his shirt and stepped forward cautiously. Covington dismounted with a practiced arrogance. Samuel Briggs, he said, tipping his hat just enough to mock politeness. I'll get straight to the point. This ranch is now mine. Samuel blinked. Yours? Since when? Since yesterday, Covington said, pulling out a set of papers. I purchased the land from the county. Official documents. Signed. He waved the papers with a smirk. You've got 2 days to clear out. Samuel took the papers with trembling hands, scanning them. They bore a seal, a signature, but it was wrong. His father's old deed was still valid. Covington couldn't have bought the land. Not legally. This is false, Samuel said quietly. Covington's eyes hardened. False or not, no one in this county will challenge me. Sheriff included. You can leave with your mule and whatever you can carry. The rest stays. Behind him, his men grinned, hands resting lazily on their rifle stocks. Samuel felt the familiar knot of helplessness tighten in his stomach. He had no lawyer, no money, no allies strong enough to stand against a man like Covington. When the men rode off, leaving a trail of dust and smug laughter, Samuel sank onto a fence post, the papers trembling in his hands. That night, Samuel packed a few belongings into a worn satchel. Daisy the mule watched him with sad eyes, as if she understood. The sky darkened, stars stretching across the heavens. Samuel sat on his porch, wondering if giving water to the Dalton gang had been his final act of grace before losing everything. Then, in the distance, he heard it, hoofbeats again. But not rushed, angry hoofbeats. Calm, steady ones. 3 riders emerged from the darkness. The Dalton gang. Wyatt Dalton swung off his horse and walked toward Samuel without a word. He handed him a rolled document sealed with wax. We heard what Covington did, Wyatt said. Man's been stealing land across the county. Thought he could scare you like the rest. Samuel unrolled the document. His heart nearly stopped. It was his original deed, clean, updated, notarized, stamped with a judge's signature. How? Samuel whispered. Wyatt smirked slightly. Let's say Covington keeps important papers in a safe that isn't very safe. Hank chuckled. He won't bother you again. Not unless he wants a visit from us. Samuel looked up, eyes stinging. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," Wyatt replied softly. At the well, in the moonlit silence, the outlaw and the rancher exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. A kindness had been returned, and a bond had formed in the unforgiving heart of the West. Word traveled fast in the Arizona territories, even faster when it carried a mix of shock, danger, and justice. Within days, whispers spread across saloons, trading posts, and dusty camps. The Dalton gang protected a poor rancher. Some claimed it was nonsense. Others swore they heard it straight from a drifter who heard Wyatt Dalton himself talking about a rancher worth more than gold. Samuel Briggs, meanwhile, was still trying to understand how his simple act of kindness had spiraled into something so big. He walked around his ranch with the restored deed in his pocket like a miracle he wasn't sure he deserved. Every time he looked toward the horizon, he half expected Covington's men to return, but they never did. Rumor had it that Covington had abruptly left the region, humiliated and furious, promising revenge on the Daltons instead of Samuel. Whether true or not, Samuel finally slept soundly for the first time in weeks. One cool morning, a wagon rattled up the dusty road to Samuel's ranch. Out stepped Henry Lawson, a journalist from the Arizona Star, carrying a notebook and the eager energy of a man chasing a story. "You Samuel Briggs?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles. "I am," Samuel replied cautiously. "I've ridden 50 miles to confirm something unusual," Lawson said. "I hear outlaws risk their necks to defend your ranch." Samuel sighed. "I didn't ask them to." "That's what makes it a story," Lawson said with a grin. "Tell me what happened." Samuel wasn't much of a storyteller, but he shared the truth. The drought, the well, the water he offered, the gang's return with his deed. Lawson scribbled every word, his eyebrows lifting repeatedly. "You gave water to criminals?" Lawson asked. "They were thirsty men before they were criminals," Samuel said simply. Lawson paused his writing, studying Samuel's face. "That line might become famous one day." Samuel chuckled. "I doubt that." But Lawson was right. A week later, the story appeared in newspapers across Arizona. Then Nevada. Then New Mexico. It was titled, "The Water Truce." Something about it captured the imagination of a country hungry for stories of dignity in a rough land. People debated it in saloons, preached it in churches, and retold it around campfires. Some said Samuel's kindness proved the West still had a soul. Others argued it showed that mercy could reach even the most hardened outlaw. The most unexpected effect came months later. Inspired by the story, a group of legislators drafted early guidelines for water rights, laws that protected the last wells in harsh regions from being exploited or monopolized. Samuel never took credit for it, though historians later insisted his small act had sparked the conversation. As the years passed, Samuel grew older but remained on his ranch. Travelers often stopped by, asking if the tale was true. He would smile modestly and say, "I only gave them water. They gave me my life back." He never saw the Dalton gang again, but sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind rustled the dry grass, Samuel wondered if somewhere out there, the three men he helped were still remembering the day a poor rancher changed their hearts. In the end, the world forgot the drought, the danger, even Covington. But it remembered the well. And the man who chose kindness when it cost him most.